Hello everybody, my name is Peter and I'm going to be your host for today's webinar. I'd just like to welcome you all to this webinar, which is with conjunction between ELN, KPMG and Thomson Reuters. Before we begin and I hand over to our experts, I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping. Now, because this is a webinar, you don't have to worry about being on camera or muting your microphone. So, however, if you do want to interact and ask a question, you can do so by going into chat, which you'll find in your menu, and then just put your question in there. And I'll do a little reminder for everybody as a sticky note that ask a question at any time, and we'll bring it to the group for discussion towards the end. This webinar is being recorded, so the video will be available to you shortly after we complete. So don't worry too much. If you miss something, you will have a chance to watch it back. Now, I do want to make one other little bit of housekeeping in that one of our speakers is sitting in the middle of an enormous storm at the moment. So if you hear some weird rumbling, it's thunder going off in the background. Really amazing. We're picking it up on the microphones here. So it's not you, it's us. So don't worry about that. Anyway, as I said, we're going to hand over in a moment to start our presentation portion, but the agenda for today looks like this. As in a moment, I'm going to hand over to Joni from KPMG to start with the speaker introductions, and then we'll move into the presentation. And we're going to talk about some of the trends and issues associated with tax technology, dealing with indirect taxes, and some of the big wins that are available, and also potentially look at a case study. Now, as I said a little earlier, we will have a Q&A session towards the end. So if you do have a question, ask it at any time in chat. I will be looking at that. I'll mark it, by the way, as a question, but we'll come to that at the Q&A. Now, we do also have a couple of polls in today's presentation. So at the appropriate points, the poll will go live. Again, you'll find it on your control panel. If you go to the poll, then just pick the answer for each one of the two questions that we have that most fits your experience. There's never going to be a perfect answer that's exactly like your experience, but pick the one that's closest. And so with this, what I'd like to do now is hand over to Joni, Joni from KPMG, to start the introductions and begin the presentation portion of the webinar. Now, whilst she does so, I'm going to go off camera, but I'm still going to be here. You may occasionally hear a disembodied voice in the background. That will be me associated with if there's an issue. But other than that, Joni, over to you.
Thank you, Peter. I appreciate very much. So let's get started. Just give me 1 second. We'll get the presentation up. Okay, so as Peter mentioned, we are going to be talking about tips for procurement projects and using technology to improve your tax process. This topic, I think, is really timely given where we are. You know, the digital transformation that we've all been experiencing, which I think has been really accelerated as a result of the pandemic, is really timely. And so we're going to share with you guys some of our insights as well as what we're seeing with some of our clients and in the market in terms of, you know, how can you better manage that your use tax and procurement processes from an indirect tax perspective. But let's get started with introductions. And so I'll start with myself. I'm Joni Johnson-Powell. I am a partner in our Denver office here with KPMG. I lead our transaction tax systems group here in the West Coast. And next, I'll hand it off to Mark.
Hi, Mark Ray. I'm a senior manager in the same practice as Joni out of the Denver office. I just transferred from Minneapolis, so working with her on leading on the West Coast side. So nice to meet everyone. Thanks for joining. Kelly?
Hi, my name is Kelly Lear, and I'm a senior director at Thomson Reuters on our partnerships and alliances team, and work to bring partnerships together to help our customers, our joint customers, with all kinds of tax technology automation. Nice to meet you all.
And hi, everybody. My name is Chris Harris. I am a senior solution consultant here at Thomson Reuters. Prior to joining Thomson Reuters, I was in the public accounting consulting field as well for about 12 years doing implementations. So my role typically is to do demos, talk about the tax engine, the values that brings to the market, things of that nature. And today we're going to be discussing some of those. So thank you.
Great. All right. So let's talk about our agenda today. We're going to start off with talking about some of the trends we're seeing in tax technology. It really continues to be a ever-changing landscape, and we're going to kind of dig a little bit deep into, how these different technologies can help you in your use tax and procurement processes. Then we're going to talk a bit about the modern day approach to indirect taxes. We'll jump to data analytics and the use of the use tax function. Next, we'll talk about the one source indirect tax determination and talk about wins and the future state. And then we'll conclude with a case study. So let's go ahead and get started. So trends in tax technology, I think in the last couple of years, we've really seen a significant change in the way that tax departments manage their indirect tax function. And one of the things I think is that I've been noticing a lot in conversations with clients and when we're diagnosing and spending time, helping our clients look at their indirect tax processes is one thing that I think is really important is that there are a lot of different indirect taxes that our clients are having to deal with on a daily basis. It's not just sales and use tax anymore that clients are having to manage. Clients are having to, because of the expansion of the way that states are looking at services and offerings, our clients have not only sales and use tax, but motor fuels tax, utility taxes, regulatory taxes, meals and liquor taxes. They all have to manage on a day-to-day basis, which of course this creates an environment that's challenging for any tax department to deal with. So as part of that, what we've seen is a lot of opportunity to automate that function using new technologies that have been developing and increasingly being used in the indirect tax function. And so that includes using tools like Alteryx to manage use tax accruals, that leveraging RPA and automating manual tasks that take your staff a lot of time to complete. Using dashboards to help support the compliance process. Also, machine learning and AI in helping review SKUs when you have, for instance, a marketplace, which really becomes important. And then just overall compliance automation. And so all of these trends are really driving an evolution in how your indirect tax function is managed on a day-to-day basis. And so there are quite a few external pressures that, the indirect tax function experiences, in managing compliance and reporting. The global legislative changes that we've seen over the last couple of years have been extensive. The EU with their digital taxes, a number of countries have been implementing e-invoicing and e-reporting mandates, global minimum tax proposals that have recently been raised by multiple countries. And so we're really seeing a need to expand the footprint in terms of the indirect tax function. In addition, there's a lot of increased burdens, right? We've got real-time reporting with countries like Brazil. We have varying sources of data. So it's not just your ERP today that you're having to consolidate and extract data for compliance purposes. There are procurement software, there's e-com, there's other peripheral or homegrown systems that also are providing data points necessary to utilize in your compliance process. And overall global expansions of the footprint of companies both in the US as well as in other countries. Another pressure I think that it's important that we're recognizing is the expanding skill set that you need for your tax resources. Understanding how to use advanced analytics or to use new tools like Power BI or Alteryx. Being involved in transformation strategies that companies are going through from end to end, and also being able to manage risk. Finally, we're also seeing a rapid development of new technologies. I remember probably 3 or 4 years ago, I was at a conference and the commentators were talking about AI, and it seemed like such a far off concept, but now we see that artificial intelligence, machine learning, and blockchain are all new technologies that are being incorporated in the tax process. And so the issues that are impacting the tax function are a lot of different areas, like centralization. I've seen clients both decentralizing and creating a more centralized process. And so that means from a centralized perspective, there's a single source ERP. They want to pull everything into one tax engine and have one procurement process. On the other hand, there are other clients that are saying, well, we've got resources that are in different locations doing different functions with a single, ERP or a single tax solution or multiple tax solutions or ERPs. We're also seeing a lot of technology enhancements with the digital transformation. And so that's upgrades of ERPs, automating the procurement function that is very relevant to the topic today, as well as the analytics and machine learning capabilities. The product and service taxability continues to be complex. We've got digital goods, we've got multiple points of use, manufacturers and R&D exemptions that you need to manage, and specific industries like oil and gas and telecommunications. From a compliance perspective, I see a lot of clients trying to determine what makes the most sense from managing their day-to-day reporting needs. Should it be insourced or should it be outsourced? Do they have the resources to deal with the data and tax requirements that burden the tax department on a daily basis? And then dealing with these new rules we talked about, e-invoicing, e-filing, withholding. Countries like Argentina have rolled out new withholding rules around VAT. And then just resourcing and dealing with, how do we make the best use of dashboards and visuals to help us manage the compliance process and the new developments, as we mentioned earlier. So what does this mean for the modern day indirect tax process? I think that means it's complicated. I think this slide depicts all of the areas that you have to consider when you're looking at your compliance process, in particular, including your use tax procurement process. And so as you look at this particular slide, what we're showing here is that, there's multiple sources of data, and it's not just the tax engine where you're looking to consolidate and review this data. And so not only is it taking data from your completed monthly processing, but really preparing that data, reviewing that data, understanding that data so that you can not only prepare the tax returns, but look for anomalies or exceptions or bad data that's going to affect your ability to report and comply with filing requirements. Also, there's the need to transform the data in a way that makes sense so that you can have an ability to analyze and provide the information that you need that needs to go back, like journal entries, reconciliations, and those other processes. And so really, the indirect tax process is quite complicated and takes a number of steps, which is why we're talking about today, how you can implement a more efficient process in managing your use tax and procurement. And the reason why this is important is that what we're seeing as part of this digital transformation is companies are transforming from end to end. And that means what tended to be a manual process around procurement and purchasing, our companies are now looking to automate that process, including the tax accruals and review process, which leads me to pass it on to Kelly to talk a little bit about how they have been helping companies all over the world with dealing with some of these issues.
Kelly, I think you might be on mute.
Sorry about that. I think, Chris, you're going to jump in here anyways, and then I'll jump in right behind you. Thank you.
Yeah, and before we get into this slide, I think we did have a polling question to the audience. So I think, Peter, if you want to maybe jump into that and distribute that. So if everybody looks to the right of your screen, I think you see a polling option. And feel free to answer however you see fit based on the question. So our biggest pain point is our indirect use tax process. In our indirect tax use process is, and just go from there. And I think we'll give this a few minutes, right, Peter?
Yeah, thank you. If we just give it a moment, and then I'll read out the results when you're ready. So just tell me when, and we'll end the poll and I'll give you the results.
So it looks like there's still some answers coming in.
And as expected, manual processes seems to be the winner here.
Probably a good segue into this next slide too.
Absolutely.
Segue for a lot of the rest of the presentation.
Right.
Yeah, but
so
nothing uncommon.
Peter, I think we're probably good to kind of start moving on. So
yeah,
thank you for that.
So let me give you
definitely
the results. If you can't see them, 41% for manual processes, 35% say their biggest pain point is limited resource or time for review. 17% said too much data, and then we had a couple of people who were talking about lack of visibility or involvement in the process, or decentralized processes. So manual processes, limited resources or time for review.
Yep.
Great.
And like I said, I think that's a pretty good segue into this conversation when you see the phrase that everybody's probably heard before: bad data in, bad data out. And what does that mean from an indirect tax perspective in terms of how we handle one source? The bad data in equation talks about your upstream, where the data is coming in and out of the solution. How do we get that? How do we integrate it? How do things like that affect your manual processes, right? What do you have to do to get that data in a position to where you can handle your compliance? On the data outside, we're talking about the actual compliance piece and how do we manage that? So we at OneSource, we can certainly leverage that with the tax engine, of course, and we do talk about that, but we also partner with Alteryx. And I think Alteryx is a tool that we look to enhance our solutions, both from a reporting perspective and from a data management perspective. And I think if we want to go to the next slide, I will throw it over to you, Kelly, if you want to go into what we're doing on the platform.
Yeah, that sounds great. So as Chris mentioned, bad data in and bad data out. So when I talk to tax professionals out there in sales and use tax, VAT and GST and others, bad data seems to always be at the root of the challenge. So at Thomson Reuters, what we've done is focused on managing data through the platform. So you can see this gives you a more expanded view over all of our platform strategy, where we're trying to expand our data management and extend into the systems and processes and ecosystems of our customers and also the firms that you're doing business with, like KPMG. So we did this through a fundamental API strategy, really opening up our architecture on the back end of our products, and then creating integrations with our partners and partner products and platforms. So that includes SAP and Ariba, as well as Oracle. And we're going to share some more things about Oracle today, some exciting new news. And then best-in-class data management solutions like Alteryx. In 2019, we put a partnership together in place to become the global reseller of Alteryx in tax, legal, and risk. And we're offering Alteryx connectors, as well as a workflow library of pre-built workflows, apps, and macros around our OneSource products. But we also collaborate very closely with KPMG, who can then work to bring more sophisticated services and data automation solutions to our clients. So we've really brought it up a notch in terms of data automation for data prep, as Joni mentioned, and aggregation across many systems, but also through forecasting, calculation, and compliance processes, all the way to extensive analysis and planning.
Right. And just to layer a couple things on there real quick too, Kelly, when you talk about use tax, I know we're talking about procurement and processing. One thing on the indirect tax side, so when I was in the consulting world, similar to Joni and Mark and stuff, a lot of things centered around vendor charge tax. As an example, how do we get reports? How do we make sure that our vendors are charging the appropriate tax and what jurisdictions those are going to? Sometimes that's hard to get the information out of an ERP, to be blunt. And sometimes it's hard to get that information in a position where you can actually do something with it. So I think with our API strategy, if anybody's familiar with Alteryx, we have connectors that can directly tap into our indirect tax solutions. They can efficiently pull large data volumes out, and we'll get to some use cases down the road. But it's to help manage things like that, because we understand that not every piece of data in your ERP runs through our tax engine. So you've got journal entries, you've got other things that are required for reconciliation. And that's really some of the challenges that we're helping our customers to solve on a pretty regular basis, and in concert with working with our friends at KPMG.
Yeah, and I really do think the innovation that you guys have come up with that direct API for Alteryx is really a game changer. So, I really do think that moves, the tax department to have, more control over their day-to-day and to really be able to complete all of those complex processes.
Thanks, Joni. And really, if you look at this picture, if you look at the left-hand side, as we all know, this is not typically just one system. There's usually multiple systems on each of these layers. So the ERP, the HR systems, all kinds of other data sources. So any way that we can figure out how do we help you guys integrate, and also KPMG does this as well, is help you guys integrate all this stuff into your processes and make it easy and painless as much as possible. So yeah, good commentary, guys. We did want to share kind of something exciting and new this year that we've done with our partnership with Oracle as well, and are working with KPMG on too, which is we are expanding our cloud-based offerings over to help customers around the globe really tackle their simplest to most complex transactional tax calculations and procurement processes. And we've done that through this new partnership with Oracle, where our one source indirect tax determination engine will be powered by Oracle cloud infrastructure. And we're also available on the Oracle Cloud Marketplace. So Oracle and Thomson Reuters will jointly market and co-sell OneSource in Oracle's 30 cloud regions, and really expand our local cloud solution offerings. But I guess really more importantly, what it means for you all, our customers, is we're enhancing our engineering collaboration with Oracle so that we hope that you will see greatly accelerated end-to-end automation. And as my colleagues on here have been kind of sharing some of those reconciliation processes, accrual processes, and so forth, as well as those more deep and broad reporting and analytics solutions we hope to bring to you all and add more value to your monthly, quarterly, and year-end cycles. So for our indirect tax solutions, we have new native dashboarding analytics and digital compliance and reporting, but we're also extending that, as I mentioned, from our platform with those APIs, making it available to connect to any system, but as well as plug and play integrations with Oracle ERP Cloud for all of the transaction tax calculations, Oracle Fusion, and Alteryx. So we'll continue to talk a little bit more about that and give you some more details of how that hopefully will benefit you all.
Yeah, and I think we'll get to that a little later in the presentation, but it's, if anybody's thinking about how this kind of translates into what it means, it's kind of similar to what we do with our Global Next and our SAP partners, right? We are formally partnering with them. We're able to set our infrastructure alongside the Oracle infrastructure. So when you think about that from an integration perspective, I think the biggest part of this is when you talk about the cloud infrastructure and the no downtime, right? The 99.99, I forget how many nines we go to now, Kelly, but it's quite a few. So it's really to help make your indirect tax processes more efficient. And then when it's that closely connected, and when we have those partnerships that we can align and we can help to source or troubleshoot issues if they do happen to come up, it really brings more efficiency to your business operations so that you have partners too. So a bunch of things there that are pretty unique, and I'm actually happy we're doing it now formally with Oracle. We've had integrations for many years, but this is really exciting for me.
Yeah, and I could say KPMG is also really excited. We have a really strong Oracle practice, and it closely aligns with the direction that we're taking it. So really excited about this new development for you guys.
Great. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Kelly and Chris. And so I would like to do a little bit a deeper dive. I know we've mentioned it a couple times, and I'm not sure if everyone is aware of all of the strengths and benefits of using Alteryx, but I know we've mentioned it more than a few times. So what I'm going to be going over in the next couple of slides is how that can help out your indirect tax department. So we'll kick it off with a polling question. So Peter, if you could bring that up, that would be perfect. Again, over on the right, if you click on polls, the question is, our current procurement use tax validation / accrual process is primarily manual, automated via ERP procurement system, automated via tax engine, automated via data analytics tool, i.e. Power BI or Alteryx, we'll discuss a lot more of right here. And then, you know, a very combination of A, B, C, and D, so a generic answer or none of the above. So I'll give you a couple more seconds here to go through that. Okay.
All right.
A lot of changing statistics.
I
Primarily
know.
manual
I was
kicked off in
thinking.
the lead and it's slowly decreasing.
Yeah, I
But
saw
I
that.
get how I get how E is makes sense, right? It's a combination. So that's good.
Yeah.
We had too many poll questions. I almost wanted to ask, I mean, the generic question of like who uses Alteryx, right? But it's hard to tell with these virtual questions. I'm so used to the in-person ones and just a quick raise of hand, but
Yeah.
you know, such are the times right now.
What I find interesting is that automated via tax engine is leading more than I anticipated, which is great. Yeah.
So we'll end the poll there. We can see, you know, primarily manual 18%, automated procurement system 10%, tax engine, like Joni mentioned, jumped to 21, combination of A, B, C, and D. Obviously the leader at 40 makes sense. Good to see that we see 5% there with automated via data analytics. So some of you will obviously be able to understand what I'm talking about here, but I took a screenshot of the previous stats and it looked like the biggest pain point of everyone's indirect use tax process is the manual processes at 41%. And then really close after that is limited resources or time to review. And Alteryx solves both of those. Actually, Alteryx ends up solving, I mean, Alteryx with a combination of a tax engine of one source as well, but just Alteryx as a standalone solves all 5 issues of lack of visibility or too much data or decentralized process, right? All 5 of those. But I wanted to focus on the first 2. So if we go to the next slide here, you can see that we've got listed the key benefits of using Alteryx. And I know that sometimes it can be difficult to go to a department or go to a VP or go to a director or anyone, whoever's on the call right now and talk about getting another license, right? What are the benefits of using Alteryx? Well, you can automate everything, automate your data processes that we've already been talking about with your manual compliance. The biggest ones I want to focus on are repeatability and scalability. And so a lot of what Alteryx helps solve in indirect tax departments is manual processes, right? A lot of things that are manual and repeatable every single month. In an indirect tax world, we know we have a lot of relatively the same tasks every single month. It's, you know, the data could always be different, but we need to get the monthly compliance out, whether that's sales and use tax returns, Canadian GST, QST returns, VAT returns. Joni mentioned withholding earlier, everything, all of that still happens on a monthly basis. And so Alteryx is perfect for that. Sorry, excuse me, we're talking about a question in there. And so what Alteryx helps do is it really helps to minimize the time on that, on all of your repeatable tasks. And you really need to go and think of it as an ROI on time and not an ROI in terms of dollars. Obviously, time equals money, but when you have your ROI in place and you go ahead and talk about, okay, this process saved 3 days a month, that's just a huge amount of time. You know, so when you talk about ROI, you really need to talk in terms of time. versus time in terms of money. One thing I want to note at the very end is data and process governance with transferability and auditability. So one of the answers was limited resources or tax department lack of visibility. When you put it all together in Alteryx workflow, you can really narrow in on the actual process that's taking place. And so when you narrow in on that process taking place, what it does is it helps, someone come and audit that process. It helps, turnover, right? Turnover has been really hot during COVID and during 2020, 2021. When someone leaves the company, if you have the Alteryx process in place, you just plug and play, go, and someone should either learn or know it. So that's a really big benefit of using Alteryx. So if we could go to the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about using Alteryx in the use tax process, since that's what we're focusing on. And so I'll talk a little bit here about how Alteryx can, for use tax automation, how you can really help analyze your vendor charge sales tax. And I have a couple of use cases in my next 2 slides that I'll go more in depth on. But basically, this is a good graphic of showing how Alteryx can either be directly connected to your ERP, directly connected to OneSource, as Chris and Kelly have already talked about, pulling the data extraction right from there. Alteryx can do the validation, it can transform your data, and then what it does is it gives your teams automated outputs of, okay, we need to make reversals of the use tax account here, we need to talk to certain vendors about them charging us sales tax in the next month, or we need to, just go back to them and have them issue us a new invoice automatically. And then also what it can do is create reports, right? Anything from compliance reports to assisting with OneSource compliance to any type of analysis that you go through with all of the different icons that are involved in Alteryx. So that's just a good graphic on how, and a good tee up on how we're going to talk about how some teams use Alteryx to analyze their vendor charge sales tax. So were we gonna address that question? I'm sorry, I didn't catch all of that.
Yeah, I think so. Brian, appreciate you sending the question over, and I think that a lot of that has to do with migration. I think Kelly and I were both reading it, and clearly there's a lot going on, so we didn't want to ignore it. But I think we might have to reach out independently to get some more background on the process. Brian, when it comes to kind of the actual process, the tools and different things, to make sure we understand. And then I'll respond to you privately here as well. So, but yeah, I think we just need some more information to make sure we're addressing it completely, because there's a lot going on in that question. So. Yeah.
And as Brian notes that our connectors are on the next gen platform, we do have customers that are connecting with Alteryx directly to like our on-prem version. Without a connector as well, connecting to the database structure or through APIs. So there's different things that are possible, but for next gen, yeah, we could talk more about a specific strategy for you. I know that we've been talking about that with our customers as well that want to move to next gen platform. So thanks for the question.
And I've actually seen a current OneSource client directly connect to their OneSource database, and they have OneSource on-prem. So not even just cloud, but they use Alteryx for a lot of compliance, because they have sales and use, they have fees as a tire company, and so they really needed to connect to Alteryx. So it is still possible with one on-prem as well. So we could go to the next slide. I'll do a short deep dive here, and obviously be conscious of time. And so this specific workflow that we built for a current client. Sorry about the title format. It looks like it changed a little bit when we transitioned to the electronic slides. So sorry about that. But what this client was doing was taking files from different ERPs, right? They have the ERP, they have their purchase general ledger, sales general ledger, tax general ledger, and then they also have a transaction extract report from OneSource. And what we did is we helped this client really pin down where they were having issues between the ERP and OneSource. And I don't want to say issues that OneSource had issues. It was issues of, okay, for some reason the ERP didn't accept the tax calculation from OneSource, or something wasn't tying out, or we were using Alteryx to help the compliance file be more readily analyzed, is the right word I want to use. And so what we did is we took both of these systems, right? We took the purchase general ledger, again, the sales general ledger, and the tax, and we did a really strong reconciliation so that the tax team knew, okay, here's where our difference is. We're using OneSource as our source of truth for compliance. We need to do a reconciliation, and then that needs to match our general ledger, because as you guys know, for audits, the auditor will go right to your general ledger, look and see if it balances with your tax returns. And if you're using OneSource as your source of truth, you need to have that reconciliation in place. And they were just having to do like a huge volume amount of transactions, and the team had to have multiple Excels just to do their reconciliation. And so, you know how Excel limits it out at 1 million some odd rows. And so we came in, we sat down with the client, we did a couple days workshop with them. We went over everything. We dotted all our I's, crossed all our T's, talked about every single process down to the smallest detail, put together a workflow. And while we were doing that, also taught them how we were doing Alteryx, right? We just did a workshop with them right there, showing them how to use it. And if a user is readily proficient in Excel, it's not very hard to learn Alteryx. They have really great forums out there to help teach. There's lots of YouTube videos out there, lots of self-help in which you can learn. So we were helping the client do that. And then what the reconciliation, what the output was it helped the team with accounting, right, with journal entries that they automatically upload right back into their ERP in the correct format. And then it also developed a reporting file for them because they were doing manual compliance from their OneSource transaction extract. And so what it did is it summed up everything by invoice, and it looked at all the jurisdictions. And then the team was able to determine, okay, we have this much use tax in Alabama, and last month we had twice as much. What's going on? Okay, so they took a look at that. Things of that nature. You can really, your team can get to the value add much quicker, right, when you implement workflows such as this versus having to spend all this time. And so I've hammered on ROI before, and I want to hammer on it again, is that this process helps save the client 3 full days a month on their compliance process. It used to take 4 days, and it went down to about 1 day to a day and a half, depending on how much value add like analysis they had to do. And so that one was just a really, really important one. It wasn't as complex as you might think. It just saved them so much time. And so it was very easy for their team to go to their director and say, we need to buy at least a couple licenses of Alteryx here. It works really well with OneSource, and it's improving our time. Things will only go up from here. So that was one case. And if we go to the next slide here, this one was a little bit more of a complex workflow. And so what we had is we had files from SAP. Sorry, I moved a little too quick. The issue with this one was that they were not validating any of their vendor charge sales tax. So they just, and that was not a limitation on OneSource's side. It was a limitation on how they set things up in SAP and Ariba. You know, this was a use case probably from a couple years ago. And so what we did is we helped them use Alteryx to validate their vendor charge sales tax because they didn't want to have, they didn't want to get too technical with some of the updates to their ERPs. Obviously, the functionality with OneSource Cloud right now, they've vastly upgraded the vendor charge sales tax verification. I'm actually working on that with a client right now in their Oracle Cloud ERP and working on that and all the different tolerances that come into play. However, with this case, they weren't willing to do that. The tax team wanted to take it over themselves instead of having to involve IT, which we know can be a little difficult sometimes. And so we helped them. It was hard to determine the ROI with this process, but what we did is we saved them thousands of dollars every month, sometimes even tens of thousands of over accrued use tax, where the vendor was not charging sales tax, and then their tax, how they had everything set up is they were just over accruing. And so that we helped them essentially deliver this workflow and take a look at some of the configuration in OneSource, right? Then we help them update their configuration in OneSource to say, okay, when we're looking at this, let's have this stay as exempt. Or, you know, we were giving the all-encompassing example of bad data in, bad data out. They were getting bad data into OneSource, and then they were getting bad results out. So we help them identify those, and then they can identify those right away, right, using Alteryx instead of having to wait for someone to sift through a really large transaction extract report for all their monthly files, right? And so it gave them a use tax determination, it gave them vendor charge sales tax validation, and it gave them a use tax accrual accounting file, which is obviously really important. So those are the two use cases I wanted to talk about now, or in this presentation. And so I'll hand it over to Joni to talk a little bit about a different type of software that we've seen.
Yeah, and as we talked about earlier today, I mean, there's a lot of different tools that are out there, and we've developed our own tool that allows for this kind of monthly review that Mark was describing. And so what we do with this tool is it's called ITAP, Indirect Tax Analytics Platform, and this cloud-based platform allows a individual using it to gain insights, to scope, review, and also learn. And so one of the really great things that we've built into it is the ability to utilize machine learning to help with some of those predictions. So the way we really generally start out these projects is really scoping, like Mark said, understanding the client's business, understanding the sources of data, understanding the pain points in that process. And by doing that, we're able to create a custom solution that focuses on those areas, leveraging the platform for analytics, focusing on those areas of overpayment or underpayment, and finding a way to better analyze on a monthly basis where those gaps and issues may be. Once we complete that process, we're able to utilize machine learning to drive those results on a monthly basis. And that provides analytics that are driven based on historical information and how from an industry perspective, or how the nature of your business in terms of areas that you had gaps before. And so good example of that is like a manufacturer, with ensuring that you identify where exemption should apply to a specific cost center or profit center. And so utilizing that to create a monthly process that automatically, through machine learning, identifies where those gaps could be. So next, I'm going to pass it back over to our OneSource team to talk a little bit more about some of the wins and achievements they've had in this arena.
Sure. And just real quick, I do see some other questions coming in. I think we're going to hold some of those till the Q&A towards the end of the session. So Chris and some folks, if you do have questions, keep coming to them. We'll hold them off so we can get through some of the presentation, and then we'll spend the rest of the time in the Q&A going through those. So thank you. Kelly, do you want to?
Awesome. Yeah. So the exciting things that we've seen both internally from our use of Alteryx as well as implementing it with our clients is that we can get to better data quality in days and weeks instead of months and years, which is a big win. And as someone mentioned, not having to always go through IT to make that happen. It can be actually accomplished by tax business end users. So that's exciting. This work is really saving a ton of time and saving internal costs, so that we're seeing some projects like Mark mentioned here that being done in 6 to 8 hours that are saving like 200 hours worth of time a month, which is incredible. So the ROI really grows exponentially here, as well as these folks now have the tools and the time to do more extensive analytics so that they can add more value to the organization overall.
Yeah, and I guess I'll maybe jump in here. This is kind of a more specific use case, and we put this slide in here for a couple of reasons. One, it's very similar to what our Joni and Mark were showing with the KPMG, but this includes some of our connectors. So you'll notice kind of on the left of your screen, you'll see a login and a download. You'll see another one of our tools noted in there called the Data Hub, right? So it's kind of our data management tool, if you will. But those connectors sit directly in Alteryx. And what you're looking at here is an example of a workflow that we created from a use case where our clients were having issues with tax variance as well, right? So they weren't working with a partner on this one, but this is something that could work in concert with what Mark showed earlier. But effectively, we did this very similar thing where we were analyzing the vendor charge tax. But the client was very specific too, in the sense that they wanted to be notified of when there were tax variances. So there are tools within Alteryx, so you're aware, where it can enhance some of our reporting capabilities. So we are working on triggering mechanisms, as some of our product teams like to refer to, in the indirect tax side when it comes to scheduled reports or when there's tax variances, making sure there's a notification sent out. In the interim, while we're working on putting those capabilities into our solution, we do leverage Alteryx to help facilitate some of that. So if you need an automated email message to make sure that your teams are aware that, hey, you've got this one vendor that has issues, or this one customer on the exemption certificate side, whatever the case may be, this is just an example. But to the bigger point, and when I was in the consulting space, we were using Alteryx a lot internally and externally to help our clients. I had a process that took about a week and a half when we were doing audit defense projects. So this extends outwards, not just within compliance, not within just determination. But when you get into things like audit defense and you're having to pull data out, right? I know a lot of my clients in the past had to deal with pulling multiple data extracts, right? You're dealing with, maybe five extracts here, 3 extracts there, but it took about 10 days to get all of the data they needed. A lot of this can be streamlined, and I think this is an example use case of that process. But it takes those processes down significantly from time. So it kind of flips the 80-20 paradigm on its head and goes more towards making sure you can analyze your data as opposed to just getting it out of your system. So you want to go to the next slide? There we go. And I think this is the case study you were referencing, Kelly, so I will let you take that.
Yeah, we thought this might be a good one to share, Chris and I, because it actually kind of bridges across what we were talking about earlier in terms of streamlining your processes through automation tools and different solutions, but also where you have staffing issues and things like that, because this use case is actually where the fact profile is that they are using a determination engine to do their calculations for procure to pay and also order to cash. But and that's globally, but then they also they have huge systems and they're having to bring that all into Business Warehouse and do some reconciliation. And then they have outsourced the compliance to KPMG. So it's kind of an interesting fact pattern here. It is a tech and data services company running on SAP ERP with a data warehouse, and they're using business objects, or they were using business objects to pull the data for the sales and use tax compliance each month. And as mentioned earlier on the call here, that the big challenge there was that there was the sheer volume of the transactional source data that needed to be pulled and reconciled, right? And so it quickly brought that business objects to its knees, and then the subsequent reports are pulled into Excel, 10 to 15 reports, which took about 2 to 4 days to run. But the data was so large that it would frequently crash and they would have to re-kick off that whole process again. So that was pretty challenging on a monthly cycle. It also made it difficult for them to make their compliance deadlines and their contractual deadlines and so forth with KPMG. So now the data is pulled directly from the warehouse using Alteryx in under an hour. The formats are also created, the reconciliation's done, the formats are created. There's also some fixing the data at the source. So some of the source data is corrected back in SAP. And then file formats are created to go into OneSource indirect tax compliance reporting, which KPMG uses to do all the returns. So it's pretty exciting to see an end-to-end cycle here where they can really make this process more efficient, future-proof, if you will, and so that everyone can focus their time on value-added activities instead of, pulling the in manual processes. So just really reducing the risk, reducing missed deadlines and the audit penalties, and having a better, more efficient process end-to-end with their outsourcing provider. So it was really a win-win for all.
Right. And so I think that brings us to the end of our presentation. We really appreciate you guys all attending today, but we'd like to jump into some questions that we got from the audience.
Yes, thanks very much, Joni. And thank you all for some great material there. We have had some questions. So, and I know that one of them, Brian, thank you very much for your question. It's one that we're going to take offline because I think it does need a little bit more of a conversation than we have time for, but we don't want to miss it. But we have had another question, and Kelly, this one's for you. I think it's from Chris. So what Chris asks is, do you have a connector for SAP S4HANA in the public cloud, and also for Ariba to calculate taxes for indirect procurement in other jurisdictions, for example, US, UK, China, and so on? So do you have a connector for SAP S4HANA in the public cloud and also for Ariba?
A great question, because I was worried that people might get excited about Oracle Cloud, but say, what about me if I'm using SAP or Ariba or even Coupa? We have Coupa integrations as well. So we do have a connector for SAP S4HANA in public cloud and also for Ariba. We've been 18 years in that partnership with SAP. So we are a premier partner of theirs and doing all kinds of things with SAP in the marketplace, and we're a spotlight partner there. So yeah, we have all of those in place that you guys can take advantage of, as well as other integrations to e-commerce platforms and Coupa, which is another major procurement platform, GEP, and some other ones. Chris, anything else you want to add there?
Yeah. I just wanted to add a couple things more from a content perspective. So you mentioned the US, UK, and China and other countries. So we do support those countries as well from a content perspective. And I think what the number is roughly about 205 countries and territories globally from a content perspective. And one thing, just to make it clear, when we talk about the engine, sometimes when you deal with compliance solutions, right, you're dealing with one for one region, one for not. The tax engine itself covers all regions. So when you talk about US, Brazil, UK, China, all those areas, it's one engine. And then to Kelly's point earlier, we integrate with all those SA4s. I think we've won the Pinnacle Award a couple of times with that integration in Global Next. So we definitely connect into SAP, Ariba, Coupa, all those different programs. And then just one other comment too. In the instance of where we don't have a standard integration, if you've got a REST API, web services capabilities within your infrastructure, we can connect to those as well. It just requires maybe a little more conversation. So, thank you for the question.
Thank you very much. Does anybody else want to chip in just before I'm actually going to stop the slide share so we can see each other? So sorry, I should have done that earlier.
Sure.
Let me then go to another question. I've had this one come through on a private chat, but this is a great one. What tips can you offer in assisting the tax department in making the business case related to the ROI for procurement automation? Mark, I'm going to come to you first with this one. So what tips can you offer in making the business case for the tax department for an ROI calculation?
Sure. Thanks, Peter. That's a good question. And as we talked about a little bit earlier, you really, to make a business case for ROI for any automation, it doesn't have to just be Alteryx. I know that's what I covered, right? But you just want to take the time to figure out how much time is spent on all of your indirect tax process, right? Get that together, figure out how much time, and depending on what automation you are going to implement, you can probably, assume to cut that time by a third, by 50%. It all depends on the situation, but you want to have a couple workshops to figure out the time. Then after that, you can figure out, okay, how has our indirect tax department been audited, right? Where are our assessments landing? How can we improve that process? Or do we have a lot of reverse audits? And I know that some firms offer that. I know KPMG offers that, but I'm just saying, everyone's talking about keeping cash in the door. And so reverse audits is cash out the door, and then obviously it comes back, but we know states are moving slower than faster these days. So those are things that you could think about to say, okay, we have a lot of reverse audits. We have, $1 million of reverse audits every single year. We have audit assessments, things of the nature. All of that can go into your ROI and try to estimate how can we decrease that just by getting a big picture of how much time and how much money is going out the door. So I'll leave it to any of my other 4 presenters if I missed anything, or 3, excuse me.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, Mark, and when you're looking at quantifying the time, not only look at the tax department, but look at AP, look at operations, the people that are also involved in manual processes, because that can add even more fuel to the fire to give value for why an automated solution is important.
Yeah, I would especially kind of add on to that, Joni, IT's time dealing with tax, right?
Absolutely.
How much time can you reduce from their plate? And, that goes into getting their buy-in too. Because I think when you talk about the stakeholders, making that business case it's not just for tax, right?
Right.
Some people think it's just tax, but it's not. So.
Right. I absolutely agree.
Yeah, and the only last point that some folks sometimes miss is that most companies are looking at, these global procurement processes overall as well, and dealing with their vendors and making sure that process is as seamless as possible. We at TR are always trying to do that as well. And so anywhere that we're having these incorrect calculations on the procurement process, it's challenging, and it really makes those vendor relationships and the vendor management, challenging.
Great, thank you very much. We've had another question come in via IM as well. This is from Clara, who's a business systems analyst, and she says, if our company is already using OneSource and the integration with ERP and Ariba network, what tips or documents are accessible to learn in a deeper level how the interface and process work? So what support, documentation and training materials are available to help with that? Who'd like to take that one?
Chris, you want to take that one, or?
I'll start if you want to, because
sure.
I think we might have to reach out to somebody to get you more information on that, right? But when it comes to kind of our customers in general, you're already on the source system, et cetera, a lot of that documentation should be available on the customer center. If it's not, we can definitely, you can clearly reach out to me. I'll send you a private message with my email if you want to give me some specifics on what you're actually looking for, because some of the information may not be there. And because I don't know specifically what you're looking for, but generally speaking, it should be available in the customer center. If it's really specific, we may just need to reach out to some of our internal teams or product teams. They can get you some more information on that. But we can get you that document.
Yeah, and we've also been working on our user groups, and also we have this new thing with our weekly huddles and also Alteryx Innovation Hours. So that's kind of interesting, where we have specific sessions on tips and tricks around various areas for indirect and direct tax as well, that might be helpful for you. But we try to get those topics to that team. And so if this is a great topic, we could get that on the team, to that team, and make sure that it's offered to all of our customers. And I know the KPMG team also jumps on our Alteryx Innovation Hour too, which is pretty fun. That's every Thursday. Yeah. So.
Great, thank you very much, Kelly. Thanks, Chris. So I'm just looking at time, and I did promise I would get everybody away on time. So let me just do a little recap about what I heard then. By the way, keep the questions coming in. We will try to get to all of them. Even if we can't do it now, we will definitely get back to you in the next couple of days. So then, well, the world is still a complex and volatile place. It's a little bit unpredictable still. And clearly what's been happening has had a lot of effect on everybody. By definition, a pandemic has. But a lot of states are looking at indirect taxation as an attractive way of raising funds. So we can expect to see more shifts and more changes going on there. And we heard about how that GIGO thing, garbage in, garbage out, or bad data in, bad data out, and how that can impact things like poor compliance, poorly informed decision making, but also just chews up time. It's a horrible time sink. So one of the things we can do to reduce the time sink is to automate as much of the end-to-end processes as possible. It reduces workload, not just for you, but for IT, who frankly right now will thank you for not giving them more pain at the moment. So, but it also gives you more bandwidth. So you can actually look at strategy and scenario planning and addressing those anomalies, the things that you can't explain in the data. And we heard about how, just like lots of businesses, there is a shift to the cloud. It is a way of actually getting scale and end-to-end quickly and affordably. Now, we also heard about how Alteryx manages the process from data extraction all the way through to report creation. But I would take it a bit further than that. I think that actually it gives you an ability to not only get the insights from reports, but to look at what of those insights are potentially actionable and what your options might be. Again, that's something that as we live in a changing world, we want to know what our options are. What are my decisions? What can I do about this? And finally, one of the things I heard with is that it is a complex process. It's not something that I think that you can do without making big demands on your own IT department, which I say right now they probably wouldn't thank you for. But it is already a very busy space to be in. So lots to do. Now, what's going to happen next? We're going to reach out to you over the next few days and give you an opportunity to continue this conversation one-to-one. And we will answer those questions that we couldn't answer today. So look out for that. As far as I'm concerned, and probably my speakers here would hate me for it, I say it's your opportunity to get a bit of consulting. So look at talk about your particular challenges, your opportunities, the questions that you may have. So look out for that. But really, all that remains for me to do now is to firstly thank our experts. So thank you very much, Chris, Joni, Kelly, and Mark. Great content. Thank you all. Thank you to KPMG and Thomson Reuters. Without this, we wouldn't have been able to run this event. To the ELN for doing the logistics and getting all of that background stuff sorted out. But most of all, I want to thank all of you for your attention, your great questions. And with that, I'm going to say thank you very much and goodbye. Take care now. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.